and welcome back to another video. So today I just wanted to jump into all the books that I want to read in the month of April. I will be going out of town for the last week of April and the first week of May. So you would think that this means my TBR is a little bit shorter, but I still have so many books that I want to get to. But without further ado, let's jump right in. So the first book that I have to talk about is technically not on my April TBR, but it's one that I'm still mid-reading, and it is Go Tell the Bees That I'm Gone by Diana Gabaldon. I'm about halfway into this book, and this is the 9th book in the Outlander series. So it is the last book that has been written so far. The pages are very thin and the text is very small, so I didn't get to finish it in the month of March. So it's definitely the one that I will be finishing in April before I dive into anything else. The next book that I have on my TBR is a priority read, and it is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This book is following President Coriolanus Snow, who is the president in the Hunger Games trilogy, and kind of his backstory and villain origin story. So we get a lot of insight into what it was like for him growing up after the first rebellion that happens in the country of Panem. So the Hunger Games were established after that, and we get to see the early days of the Hunger Games in this book. I have seen the movie adaptation of it and I absolutely loved it. And I tried to read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes like 5 years ago when it first came out, but I just couldn't get into it then. I just think I wasn't in the right headspace to read it. So it's definitely one that I want to read this month, especially considering Sunrise and the Reaping just released. I love reading about morally gray characters. I really think that President Snow is a character that I'm going to really resonate with. I don't know that I'll feel a lot of sympathy or empathy for him necessarily, but I do love seeing how villains become the villains that they are. And I would love to get some more insight into how he becomes who he is in the main trilogy from this book. The next book on my TBR is Sunrise and the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is the second prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, and it is following the 50th annual Hunger Games. So this was the second quarter quell, and these were the games where Hamish Abernathy was part of them, and he won, of course. But we get some of his insights from his games and his time in the Hunger Games, what happened there, and I'm just so curious to dive into Hamish's backstory. From what we see of him in the Hunger Games trilogy, he's had a lot of trauma, but he's a very mysterious figure. We never really understand or see how that all plays out for him. So I'm really curious to see how the Hunger Games will play out in this one and why Hamish is the way that he is in the main trilogy. I can't wait to dive into this and see how it all plays out. And this is a new release. It just came out in March, so I'm excited to dive in. The next book that I have is a rollover from my March TBR, and it is an e-arc. So this is an advanced reader copy of Hardly a Gentleman by Eloisa James. This is book 2 in the Accidental Bride series, and it follows this girl who kind of flees from London after a very disastrous London season. She just wants to be left alone, and she hires a carriage to take her to Scotland, and she pretends to be a housekeeper. So she starts working for this laird, and he doesn't have really any interest in having a wife until he meets her, and then he's determined to have her. This sounds like such a cute story, and I think it'll definitely be like a forced marriage of convenience kind of vibe. I think it'll be such a light and fun read, and this is definitely something that I really need to read after the books that hammered me at the end of March. Alright, so the next book on my April TBR is also a carryover from the month of March, and it is Once Upon a Rose by Gabrielle Landy. It follows a cursed lord, a feisty librarian, and a disguised pet dragon. So this lady named Beatrice Montgomery is working as a librarian. She's trying her hardest to make her library a success, and this lord is finding that his time is running out to find a wife. He needs to find a wife and marry her before a curse destroys everything to provide for his people, and he will give her funds for her library if she agrees to marry him in a marriage of convenience. I absolutely love that trope, so I am dying to read this. It sounds like it's a little bit of like a Beauty and the Beast story retelling as well, which is super fun. And there is also a dragon that's watching their every move, and this curse is slowly taking over, but he finds himself falling in love with the librarian, and he doesn't want to die, but he hasn't told her anything about it yet, so I'm so curious to see how it'll all play out. The next book that I have on my April TBR is Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. This is one of the 25 books that I want to read in 2025 list, and it's about a competitive diver and a swimmer who kind of jump into a forbidden, steamy college romance. This sounds like it'll be a super fun read. I think that it's going to be very, very hot, very steamy in this one. So hopefully that means that it'll be just a little bit more lighthearted to get into. And it's about this junior who's at Stanford, and she is trying to keep her head down, and this swim captain, they kind of set up an arrangement with each other, and it's a sexual relationship that they have. So they just have a brief fling, and that's all that they plan for it to be. But is that all that it will be? I am so curious to see how this physical connection will grow into something more. and hopefully it's one that I like. I know that this book especially has been a very divisive release for Ali Hazelwood, so I would like to dive into this one and then see how I feel about it myself. All right, the next book that I put on my April TBR is Only for the Week by Natasha Bishop. Now this one sounds super intriguing. It sounds like it's got some thriller aspects to it going on. It says that you are cordially invited to the wedding of Amory Cross and Arnold Hightower, and she is the ex-girlfriend of the groom, and she's now secretly sleeping with the best man, and it's about their adventures and their stolen moments together. And I think that there's going to be some mysterious aspects happening to this because it says what happens in Tulum stays in Tulum, so I don't know if something's gonna happen here or what. It sounds a little bit creepy, a little bit thrillery, so I'm intrigued. I don't know too much more about this book, but it definitely sounds like one that will keep me on the edge of my seat. The next book that I have is The Life of Herod the Great by Zora Neale Hurston. Now this book sounds super interesting. It's kind of following this Old Testament character of Herod the Great, and it's kind of challenging him to be a better version. So in the Bible, he was like a tyrant who killed many children and all of that, but in this one, he's kind of singled out for a new fate, and he has to like navigate a lot of war and politics around him. I think that this will be a very interesting book to read. I read Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston a few years ago, and I know that that's her most famous book, and I enjoyed that one, so I'm curious to see how this one will play out. It sounds like an interesting like biblical retelling, so I am fascinated by it, and I can't wait to dive into it. Hopefully it'll be one that I like, especially because Zora Neale Hurston's writing is so beloved, and she's considered a classic Black author. The next book that I have on my TBR is Before We Were Trans. It's a new history of gender. So it's basically following gender identity through the ages, through history, and how different cultures and societies have viewed sex and gender and these binary categories. I love books that kind of break down these societal molds and these kind of categories that we've set up for ourselves. I think that it'll break that down, and it will be very interesting to see how the trans experience is today compared to how it would have been in the past in other societies. I think that it'll be a very informative read. I don't know that it'll be entertaining, but I think I will learn a lot from this one, and it's definitely one that I can't wait to dive into. I think that kind of breaking down gender and understanding where these concepts come from is very important to be able to understand transgender people better and to have more empathy for the LGBTQ plus community. All right, and then the last book that I have from my April TBR is actually a collection of poetry, and it is Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. It says, "This is the journey of surviving through poetry. This is the blood, sweat, tears of 21 years. This is my heart in your hands. This is the hurting, the loving, the breaking, the healing." I've heard great things about Rupi Kaur's poetry collections, so I can't wait to dive into this one. And as I was recently reminded by Isabel, April is Poetry Month. So it is National Poetry Month, so it is the perfect time to dive into this poetry collection and see how I feel about it. I probably won't read it all at once, like I said in my haul video, but I would like to read a poem here and there throughout the month and hopefully finish the collection before the end of April. Those are all the books that I plan on reading in the month of April. Now, I won't necessarily stick only to this TBR. I'm going to give myself a little bit more freedom to mood read as I see fit, and if I find myself getting a little bit slumpy, I'm going to change up some genres just to try to keep myself more motivated to read this month than I did last month. But I'd love to hear what books you have on your April TBR, and I'd love to know if you've read any of these books as well. If you don't do TBRs, I'd love to know what book you are currently reading or any books that you are highly anticipating reading next. Let me know all these things in the comments down below. And as always, thank you so much for watching my video. I appreciate each and every one of you that watches my videos, and if you liked it, give it a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for being here, and wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, I hope that you are doing well. Take care, and I will see you for the next one. Bye!